Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode: Site X Oak Ridge, Tennessee Site X. While Los Alamos provided the theoretical architecture and Hanford forged the plutonium, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, secretly codenamed Site X during World War II, served as the industrial and technological beating heart of the Manhattan Project. Established in 1942 across nearly 60,000 acres of isolated Appalachian terrain in Roane and Anderson counties, the massive reservation was entirely erased from civilian maps. Behind its perimeter of armed guard towers and 7 security checkpoints, the facility achieved the nearly impossible feat of industrial uranium enrichment, producing the critical uranium-235 core utilized in the Little Boy atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Decades later, declassified historical files and rare photographic documentation have surfaced, revealing a parallel history. Early, highly restricted unidentified aerial phenomena recorded directly over the nuclear production facilities of Oak Ridge, exposing how humanity's atomic dawn drew an immediate and permanent watch from the unknown. As the primary site for uranium enrichment, its sprawling facilities consumed massive amounts of electricity, making its skies some of the most sensitive and restricted airspaces in the United States. Yet, beneath the massive industrial output and the veneer of wartime secrecy, Site X developed a parallel history. It became an early, heavily monitored hotspot for unidentified aerial phenomena. To fully grasp the historical and psychological weight of Site X, one must examine the bizarre closed-loop society engineered within the rolling hills of East Tennessee. When the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, led by General Leslie Groves, seized nearly 60,000 acres of rural land in 1942, they did not merely build an industrial complex, they constructed a surreal, hyper-controlled utopian prison dedicated entirely to the atomic bomb. The isolation of Oak Ridge was absolute by design. Nestled within the natural barricades of the Cumberland Mountains and the Clinch River, the reservation was transformed into a militarized zone almost overnight. The entire 60-acre enclave was choked off from the outside world by miles of heavy barbed wire, electrified fences, and armed watchtowers manned by military police. Access was restricted exclusively through 7 heavily guarded security gates, such as portals like Elza Gate. Every resident and worker wore color-coded badges that dictated their exact clearance level. A vast internal security apparatus, including undercover military intelligence agents posing as ordinary workers, monitored conversations in mess halls, grocery stores, and bus lines. To talk about what you did, or even ask questions about the final product, was viewed as a severe threat to national security. Inside the fence lines, life moved at a frantic round-the-clock pace across 3 grueling shifts, yet the population existed in a state of profound intellectual blindness. The 75,000-plus chemists, engineers, construction workers, and young female operators, often called the Calotron Girls, operated massive, complex machinery without ever being told what they were making. Workers at the Y-12 plant monitored giant electromagnetic dials and gauges, while workers at the K-25 plant maintained miles of gaseous diffusion barriers, all while operating under the strict mantra: what you see here, what you hear here, what you do here, let it stay here. Thousands of people spent years of their lives helping to build the most destructive weapon in human history, only to learn its true purpose on August 6, 1945, when they heard President Truman's radio announcement about the bombing of Hiroshima. This unprecedented level of enforced ignorance, combined with monotonous labor, overcrowding, and strict rationing, created a surreal societal pressure cooker. Residents lived in hastily constructed prefab houses, trailer parks, and sprawling dormitory towns that lacked basic municipal amenities early on, turning the muddy Appalachian valleys into a surreal frontier boomtown. When viewed through the lens of modern ufology, this environment takes on an even stranger dimension. The psychological conditioning required to live and work inside a top-secret bubble, where ordinary reality was entirely superseded by classified directives and unseen forces, created a population uniquely primed to witness high strangeness. When anomalous, glowing objects began silently drifting over the heavily guarded smokestacks of the Y-12, and K-25 plans. The workers of Site X were already living in a reality stranger than fiction, guarding a secret weapon that had just invited the unblinking gaze of the cosmos. To understand the colossal scale of Oak Ridge, one must look at the sheer engineering audacity required to separate uranium-235 from natural uranium ore. Natural uranium consists of over 99.3% non-fissionable U-238 and less than 0.7% of the fissionable U-235 isotope needed to sustain a nuclear chain reaction. Separating these two nearly identical isotopes was described by lead scientists as trying to separate fine grains of sand by color while blindfolded. To solve this impossible problem, Site X deployed two entirely different multi-billion-dollar industrial processes running simultaneously across massive, sprawling complexes, Y-12 and K-25. Located in a secluded valley within the Oak Ridge Reservation, the Y-12 National Security Complex was designed to enrich uranium using electromagnetic separation. A massive scale-up of physicist Ernest Lawrence's cyclotron technology, dubbed the Caltron California University cyclotron. Uranium tetrachloride feed material was vaporized and ionized into a charged beam of particles. This beam was then accelerated through a powerful magnetic field generated by giant electromagnets. Because U-235 atoms were slightly lighter than U-238 atoms, the magnetic field curved their trajectory into a slightly tighter arc, allowing the desired isotope to be caught in a pocket while the waste material slammed into the walls. The electromagnets required millions of pounds of copper to wind the massive coils. Because copper was desperately needed for wartime electrical wiring and munitions, the U.S. Treasury took the extraordinary step of lending 14,700 tons of pure silver bullion, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, to be cast into giant bus bars and magnet coils for Y-12. Thousands of young women, mostly recent high school graduates recruited from rural Tennessee and surrounding states, sat in long rows operating massive control panels day and night. They were trained to monitor needle gauges and adjust electrical dials to keep the ion beam stable, operating entirely blind to the fact that they were purifying the core of the atomic bomb. They were told only that their work was helping to shorten the war. While Y-12 relied on electromagnetism, an entirely separate method was developed at the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant on the western edge of the Oak Ridge Reservation. K-25 was built to pump uranium in a gaseous state, uranium hexafluoride, through thousands of stages of microscopic porous metal barriers. Because the lighter U-238 gas molecules move fractionally faster than the heavier U-238 molecules, they pass through the microscopic pores of the barrier, slightly more often. By cascading this process thousands of times through an immense series of pumps and pipes, the gas became progressively enriched in U-235. At the time of its construction, K-25 was one of the largest buildings under one roof on planet Earth. Shaped like a massive, continuous U-letter measuring nearly a mile long and 4 stories tall, it covered millions of square feet of floor space. K-25 operated as a closed, humming labyrinth of pumps, valves, and compressors. To force the corrosive uranium gas through the miles of piping, the facility consumed more electrical power than entire major cities, such as New York City or Chicago. Entire coal-fired power plants and massive hydroelectric dams were commandeered just to feed K-25's insatiable electrical appetite. The combined operation of Y-12's gargantuan electromagnets, powered by literal tons of silver, and K-25's sprawling network of electrical compressors, created an unprecedented technological footprint. These facilities did not just hum. They generated massive artificial electromagnetic fields and high-frequency atmospheric resonance that radiated out over the Cumberland Mountains. In the context of modern anomalous research, this immense energetic signature acted as a profound technological beacon. The artificial energies screaming from the smokestacks and bus bars of Y-12 and K-25 was signaled across the atmospheric and electromagnetic spectrum, drawing the unblinking, curious gaze of whatever intelligence was monitoring humanity's violent, sudden leap into the atomic age. To understand why the skies above Oak Ridge, Tennessee, became an early hotspot for high strangeness and unidentified aerial phenomena, one must examine the profound physical footprint left by the Manhattan Project. The staggering industrial output of Site X did not stay confined to factory floors or underground vaults. It radiated outward, casting a violent, artificial signature across the electromagnetic and atmospheric spectrum of the American Southeast. The sheer scale of energy consumption at Oak Ridge created a localized anomaly in Earth's natural background environment. The massive calatrans operating inside the Y-12 complex relied on monumental electromagnets, powered by millions of amperes of direct current. These coils generated immense, sprawling magnetic fields that warped local compass readings, magnetized surrounding structural steel, and bled outward into the surrounding Appalachian atmosphere. Meanwhile, the sprawling labyrinth of the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant utilized thousands of heavy-duty compressors and electrical pumps running 24/7. The acoustic and electromagnetic hum generated by this mile-long industrial behemoth created a permanent pulsing energetic signature that could be detected across multiple wavebands. The combination of high-voltage electrical distribution, massive uranium hexafluoride processing, and raw electrical draw ionized the air above the reservation, creating localized atmospheric distortions. Corona discharges and unusual luminous glows in the night sky that routinely confused local observers. This unprecedented technological output forms the core of what alternative historians, quantum physicists, and ufologists term the atomic magnet hypothesis. According to this framework, an advanced non-human or interdimensional intelligence does not discover human civilization through casual visual observation. Instead, they monitor the universe through energetic signatures. The sudden mastery of atomic fission and the violent release of fissile energy acts as a massive flare in the electromagnetic and quantum dark. The intense gamma radiation, neutron flux, and artificial electromagnetic fields produced by facilities like Oak Ridge, Hanford, and Los Alamos signaled a species crossing a dangerous evolutionary threshold. Proponents of the hypothesis suggest that these energy signatures functioned as a literal beacon drawing anomalous craft to investigate the disturbance. Just as a modern ecologist tags and monitors wildlife when a species develops a dangerous new tool, the sudden ignition of the atomic age in 1945 compelled an external intelligence to deploy surveillance craft directly over the industrial VATs of Tennessee and the test ranges of the American West. When the workers at Site X looked up into the skies over Roane and Anderson counties and reported silent, glowing orbs or fast-moving tubular objects, tracking the perimeter of the Y-12 and K-25 plants, they were witnessing the direct intersection of two realities. Humanity had reached down into the subatomic building blocks of matter to rip apart the atom, and in doing so, created an energetic beacon so bright that it pierced the veil between our consensus reality and the wider cosmic web, permanently locking the nuclear age to the modern mystery of the UFO. The restricted airspace above Oak Ridge was treated as a zero-tolerance military zone protected by anti-aircraft batteries and regional interceptor units. Despite this, declassified military archives and FBI records document a series of baffling incursions and high-strangeness events directly tied to the reservation. While public consciousness usually links the iconic July 1947 UFO wave to the Roswell crash in New Mexico or Kenneth Arnold sighting over Mount Rainier, a parallel, deeply suppressed event was unfolding in the heavily guarded skies of East Tennessee. The July 1947 Oak Ridge photographic incident stands as a textbook example of how the military intelligence apparatus mobilized to quarantine of visual proof of anomalous phenomena over America's top-secret nuclear facilities. In the immediate wake of Kenneth Arnold's June 24th sighting, which coined the term flying saucer and triggered an unprecedented national media frenzy, the jittery atmosphere around Site X reached a boiling point. A local resident and civilian employee within the Oak Ridge Reservation witnessed an unsettling disruption in the restricted skies overhead. Breaking sharply away from standard commercial or military flight paths, an unidentifiable object streaked across the atmosphere, leaving behind a persistent, unusual vapor trail capped by a luminous, hovering ball of fire. Recognizing the significance of the anomaly and perhaps possessing photographic equipment common among technical workers documenting the area, The witness managed to snap multiple photographs, capturing the luminous object and its anomalous atmospheric wake directly above the restricted perimeter of the reservation. In 1947, photographing the airspace or facilities around Oak Ridge was already a federal offense carrying severe penalties under the Espionage Act. However, when the subject of the photographs turned out to be an unidentified aerial anomaly over a uranium enrichment complex, the response from military intelligence was swift and absolute. Within hours or days of the photographs being developed or discussed, Air Force intelligence officers, operating alongside Manhattan Project security personnel and compliance teams, tracked down the witness. The operatives seized all physical photographs, negatives, and camera equipment. The witness was subjected to intensive debriefings and stern warnings regarding national security oaths. The message was unequivocal. The material never existed, and any future discussion would be treated as a grave violation of federal law. What makes the July 1947 Oak Ridge incident particularly compelling is not just the standard suppression, but what happened behind closed doors within the military technical ranks. While official press releases and public statements from the military during the summer of 1947 routinely dismissed flying saucer reports as weather balloons, misidentified aircraft, or mass hysteria, internal channels told a different story. Military photographic technicians and intelligence analysts who examined the confiscated negatives privately noted that the images showed no signs of double exposure, tampering, or optical artifacting. The vapor trail and the luminous spherical object exhibited physical properties and flight dynamics that defied contemporary aviation engineering. The suppression of the Oak Ridge photographs established the permanent blueprint for how the U.S. government would handle civilian documentation of UAPs near strategic assets. By treating a civilian photograph of an unknown luminous object with the same draconian security protocols applied to atomic blueprints, the military ensured that the intersection of nuclear infrastructure and UFO activity remained shrouded in secrecy. The July 1947 incident at Site EX proved that the Watcher phenomenon was real enough to panic the highest levels of national security, and that the government was willing to rewrite reality to keep the public in the dark. The psychological and operational shock waves that rippled through the American military establishment during the late 1940s and early 1950s are nowhere more evident than in the air defense logs of East Tennessee. While civilian newspapers were busy printing headlines about flying saucers, the United States Air Force and Atomic Energy Commission were quietly confronting a terrifying operational reality. The most secure nuclear airspace in the world was completely indefensible against unknown intruders. As advanced radar networks such as the Early Warning and Ground-Controlled Interception (GCI) systems were rapidly deployed and upgraded across the Cumberland Plateau and the Tennessee Valley, they cast a continuous electronic net over Site X. What those radar scopes revealed shattered any notion that the incursions were merely optical illusions or misidentified weather phenomena. Throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, radar stations stationed near Knoxville and the perimeter of Oak Ridge tracked targets, moving at velocities that far exceeded contemporary propeller-driven or early jet aircraft. These blips routinely registered speeds calculated in the thousands of miles per hour, executed instantaneous 90-degree right-angle turns without losing momentum, and dropped from high altitude to hover motionless over the sensitive production zones of the Y-12 and K-25 complexes. Most unnerving to base commanders were the stationary targets. Radar operators watched in disbelief as unidentified contacts locked their positions directly over the massive uranium processing buildings, lingering for hours in defiance of wind currents before accelerating away into the stratosphere in a matter of seconds. Because anti-aircraft batteries positioned around Oak Ridge were fundamentally useless against targets operating at extreme speeds and altitudes, air defense relied entirely on scrambled interceptors. To secure the vulnerable skies over Site X, the military tasked regional fighter wings, most notably groups stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky, as well as other tactical air commands across the Southeast, with maintaining active, high-alert air defense postures over the nuclear reservation. When radar operators detected an unauthorized signature violating the restricted zone, alarm bells echoed through military readiness rooms. P-51 Mustangs and later early jet fighters like the F-80 Shooting Star were scrambled into the night sky with orders to intercept, identify, and, if necessary, engage the unknown craft. The operational reality of these scrambles turned into a chronic embarrassment and a source of deep anxiety for the Pentagon. Whenever military pilots managed to vector their aircraft close enough to visually acquire the targets, the encounters typically ended in frustration. The anomalous craft would either casually accelerate away, vanishing faster than the jets could push their throttles, or effortlessly outmaneuver the interceptors, executing maneuvers that subjected human pilots to G-forces that would have torn conventional airframes apart. On several occasions, pilots reported encountering severe radio static, compass deviations, and total instrument panel failure as they closed in on the glowing orbs or disc-shaped anomalies, hinting at a powerful electromagnetic defensive or propulsive field surrounding the craft. The radar tracking logs and frantic fighter scrambles over Oak Ridge exposed a chilling truth to the post-war military establishment. Humanity had unlocked the ultimate weapon of mass destruction, but we were entirely powerless in the presence of an intelligence that could treat our most heavily guarded nuclear airspace like an open playground. To understand the tragic death of Captain Thomas Mantell on January 7, 1948, one of early ufology's most infamous and fatal encounters, one must look beyond the skies of Godman Army Airfield in Kentucky. The operational paranoia, the hair-trigger air defense protocols, and the frantic obsession with unidentified objects over high-security installations were forged directly in the crucible of places like Oak Ridge, Site X. The security climate that killed Mantell was a direct structural extension of the panic consuming America's nuclear airspace. By late 1947 and early 1948, the continuous radar tracks of anomalous objects over Oak Ridge, Hanford, and other sensitive military zones had transformed the U.S. Air Force from a posture of curiosity into one of aggressive defensive readiness. The fighter group stationed at Godman Field in Kentucky, the very unit Mantell belonged to, was not operating in a vacuum. It was part of the broader regional air defense umbrella tasked with safeguarding the Eastern Nuclear Corridor, including the heavily fortified airspace stretching from Fort Knox directly over the Cumberland Plateau toward Oak Ridge. Pilots were briefed that unauthorized high-performance craft, capable of defying current aerodynamic laws, were violating restricted domestic airspace. When Godman Tower picked up a massive, metallic, luminous object hovering over the base on that January afternoon, Mantell and his flight of Flight 51D Mustangs were scrambled not as a routine training exercise, but under the heavy psychological weight of a national security threat. As Mantell spiraled his fighter upward in hot pursuit of the massive, disc-shaped object reported by both ground control and multiple military witnesses, he fell victim to the exact operational trap set by the nuclear-age security panic. Urged on by commanders to identify the craft at all costs, Mantell pushed his F-51D far beyond its safe operational ceiling. Without proper oxygen equipment for extreme high-altitude climbs, Mantell suffered hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, lost consciousness at roughly 25,000 feet, and went into a fatal dive that shattered his aircraft over a farm in Franklin, Kentucky. To downplay the terrifying implications that a military pilot had been lured to his death by an unknown technological marvel, the Air Force quickly leaned on the prosaic skyhook balloon hypothesis, claiming Mantell had chased the planet Venus, our classified Navy high-altitude research balloon. Yet, insiders knew the truth. A veteran combat pilot had been killed because the military's panic over anomalous overflights demanded immediate aggressive interception at any cost. The Mantell incident proved that the intersection of nuclear infrastructure and UFO phenomena had created a dangerous new paradigm. The rigid shoot first or chase at all costs mentality born out of protecting Oak Ridge and the Manhattan Project's secrets had bled into the regular military chain of command. When anomalous objects danced over restricted zones, human lives became expendable collateral damage in a desperate futile attempt to solve the mystery of the skies, leaving Captain Mantell's death as a permanent monument to the lethal friction between human military hubris and non-human intelligence. Oak Ridge proved that the intersection of nuclear technology and UFO phenomena was not an isolated quirk of the New Mexico desert or the Pacific Northwest. From the uranium enrichment halls of Tennessee to the plutonium VATs of Washington and the test ranges of Nevada, the dawn of the atomic age was shadowed step for step by the unknown. Site X remains a foundational pillar in the history of how humanity's greatest technological leap drew the unblinking gaze of the skies, reinforcing the growing conviction among military officials that whatever was piloting these craft had a calculated systemic interest in our mastery of atomic energy. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of real-life experiences, perfect for your daily plunge into consciousness exploration. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.